Come with me on an adventure while we paint a covered bridge painting. This is one of my top fall requests, so here we go. I started with a base layer for my sky and my ground. I just used sky blue and white with my mop brush, doing back and forth strokes at the top of my canvas. And then I cleaned it off and grabbed some dark brown and light brown together and did back and forth strokes all the way down to the bottom. Notice my brown is slightly tilted up to the left a little. I didn't want a perfectly straight horizon for this. And then I made sure it's dry. That's the background. Now, I will have a traceable image for this, but I sketched a general outline for my bridge, which is similar to the shape of a barn. So remember, we did a 4th of July barn painting. I started like that, but then extended the side out going back to the left. Then I took some red paint and just a round brush and did the general outline in red, because we're going to have a red covered bridge. I'm not being too particular about the perspective here. I'm just getting a general shape because I don't know what it's going to look like in the end. I'm actually going to walk you through my creative process today because I don't have a reference. This is just a picture that I've had in my head for a while and I've been wanting to get it out on canvas. And then once you have your outline, fill it in with a solid color. This is just going to be the first coat and we're going to do some color blocking. For the roof, I wanted to fill it in with a brownish tan color, so I'm just taking a combination of brown, tan, and white and filling that in as well. To fill in shapes like buildings, it does help to use a flat brush with a squared edge, and that's what I'm using here. Let's add a little bit of the roof on the right-hand side. And then don't forget to fill in the doorway. I did a squared doorway. I've seen a lot of other versions where they did curved doorways. That's up to you what style you want to do. I'm just doing a dark brown to show that it's going into the dark. So there's the color blocking for my bridge. And then make sure it's dry. Now take an artist sponge or really anything with texture so we can add some leaves for fall leaves. I took dark red, dark purple, and even a little bit of pink to do a really deep purpley color. I wanted it to be distinguished from the red in the bridge, so that's why I changed it slightly. And I'm just tapping in leaves. These are going to be trees behind the bridge. And just kind of piece them in. I'm going to do multiple different colors. See, I cleaned off my sponge. I'm grabbing some bright orange mixed with a tiny bit of medium brown here to make it more of a fall tone and bounce the colors in. Now, I'm using a large textured artist sponge here because I want my sky to be showing through. You don't want the leaves to be so dense that you lose your sky completely. So start with a larger texture and then we'll work our way to a smaller texture to make them more dense in some areas. See, I'm piecing in some orange in 3 different spots. Then I cleaned off my sponge again and I grabbed some yellow. I used 2 different shades of yellow and some white to help it pop. Maybe there's a tree going up here that goes all the way up to the top of the canvas. You don't want your trees to be all the same height, and you want the colors to be mixed in different areas. Don't separate it into stripes or perfect patterns. So there's some yellow. And maybe not all the leaves changed yet. Usually you see a mixture of green in some places too. So I'm going to do a few taps in there as well. Okay, so something like this. Now I'm going to take a fine textured sea sponge. It just has smaller texture. And taking the same colors, I'm going to go back in and be a lot more particular about shaping my trees. You don't want too much paint on your sponges. If you use too much, you're going to get big blobs of paint. So I have barely any on here, and I'm lightly tapping in the different areas to more define the edges and make it thicker in some areas in the middle. Don't be afraid to get some leaves on your covered bridge either, because those lines are going to get messy. We just blocked it in for spacing, but you can always fix them up later. So there's my leaves. I'm going to lightly just re-outline the bridge. That way I can see where it is. Again, this is just for spacing, so we know where it's going to be compared to the trees. And then let's add some tree trunks and branches. I'm going to use one of my fine line brushes. This is from my nail art brush pack. And again, I love how they make really tiny, fine little branches. So start with trees down at the bottom of the ground and then take as much time as you want on the detail for these branches. I'm using dark brown and a little black to make them even darker for contrast. You should be using a very light touch on your brush. You're just very lightly touching the canvas. And it also helps to have your paint very thinned out. So add maybe even a tiny bit of water or even paint medium if you have it to make it more liquid. That's going to help your branches run smooth. And also, while they're still wet, take a tiny bit of tan or a highlight color and go in and add some highlights to your trunks and a tiny bit to your branches. I'm kind of loosely pretending the light source is coming from the right-hand side somewhere, so I'm going with that. Just a hint. And take your time with all this detail. I'm just full disclosure going to tell you it took me a full hour to get all of my trees and branches in. I did speed this up just to show you the process. And they don't all have to be going up perfectly straight. Maybe there's a tree branch coming off from this side of the river, so I have that poking in from the side. And then I have little branches that are slightly bigger coming off of that as well. Don't forget that branches usually get thinner towards the ends and thicker towards the bottom of the trees. And each branch should have a slight V angle. Notice I have all different angled V's back here. So there's how my trees turned out. If you don't like your branches, you could always go back and add more leaves, but I'm going to move on to the river. Or maybe it's a creek because it's a small covered bridge. Let's just color block where the water's going to be going underneath. So I'm taking a round brush with a few different shades of blue, and let's say maybe it's flowing underneath the bridge and coming towards us, so maybe the water's going to flow out to the bottom left-hand corner. In my head, I had it where it was darker towards the far side, and maybe the sun is shining onto it, making a brighter blue towards the bottom left-hand corner like this. So I blended in some brighter blue in the corner and made it darker towards the bridge. Something like that. And let's block in the color for the road. I wanted it to curve through the bridge and curve around and coming towards us like this. And I'm just going to fill that in with a solid color. I'm using a combination of tan, brown, and a little bit of medium brown as well. So we're just getting general spacing. Notice it gets wider as it's coming towards us, like that. Okay. I also want to kind of color block in the grassy texture. So I'm going to have grass on the brown areas that are left over. And to do this, I'm taking a fan brush with a combination of white, tan, and dark green. So on the far side of the bank back here, it's going to be tiny little grasses. Notice I'm doing tiny little upward strokes with my fan brush. I'm holding it horizontally. And the middle, it's a little closer so the grasses can be bigger. Very little paint on your fan brush. If you have too much, you're just going to get big green blobs. So almost like dry brushing on this texture, doing little upward brush strokes. And don't forget this side, as they come towards you, they can also get bigger. So as I get down towards the bottom, they can be taller grasses like that. So that's the general idea of what's in my head. So let's go in and add some detail now. To do this, let's start with a second coat on our bridge. And I'm going to use a size 8 flat brush with some red, some black, and a tiny bit of white to dry brush on to give it a rustic look. Now, I'm pretending that the bridge is made out of big, long wood boards, and the wood boards are the width of my brush. So you decide what size brush to use for the width of your boards, and I'm using that length to space out my brush strokes. Notice my brush strokes are going straight up and down from the edge of the roof to the bottom of the bridge. And I'm doing the red and the black first, and then dry brushing on the white over top. This is giving you texture, and it's also adding the second coat. So by the end of this, you shouldn't be able to see any of your background showing through. Don't forget the front side of your bridge. Same thing, up and down brush strokes, making sure you're going around the doorway. And then make sure that that left-hand corner that's closest to you, just make sure you keep that defined somewhere so you don't lose it as you do the detail and perspective. So something like that. Let's also add some shading to inside the doorway. I took some black on my round brush and just made the left-hand side where it's the wall on the far end. The light wouldn't be shining in there as much, but notice it goes out to a brownish shade that's lighter on the right-hand side because that's where the light would be shining a little bit. While I have that dark brown, I'm also going to clean up the edges of my roadway. You can define that curve just a little bit more. And you can even add some more shading to the road that's coming from the inside of the bridge as well, starting to give it some dimension. Let's also define the doorway a bit more as well with some decorations. So I'm taking a small round brush and black paint. Let's clean up all of these edges, make sure each of them are straight. Notice because the further side is away from us just a little, it's a little shorter on the right-hand side than it is on the left. Let's also fix up the roof. I'm taking some of the roof color on that round brush and cleaning up the edges of the red texture we got into the roof. Also notice that this backhand side was tilted up a bit too far, so I brought that down and brought the line a little bit straighter. I'm starting to see the perspective, so we brought that line down so it lines up with the back side of the road. And then why don't we add a decoration in the doorway? Again, there's so many different style covered bridges. You could do whatever you want here. I'm going to add like a stylistic wood board design here. I just took some of the color from my roof and did that around. I'm taking a detail brush and adding some wood grain texture with some of the darker brown, outlining it with some really dark brown here. And why don't we add a little bit of decoration in these corners? I don't know, that's what's in my head. That's the fun part of coming up with paintings as you go. You can do whatever you want. You also can adjust as you go. So I brought the roof down in the back, so I had to add one more wood board to make it the right length. Let's also take some black on our detail brush and outline all these straight edges now so we can see what's going on with the perspective. Once you do your outline, you can also add some shading underneath the roof. I'm taking my flat brush and mixing a bit more black in with my red to do some shading. I'm just brushing down that black line with some of that darker red so it looks like the roof is casting a shadow. Let's do the same thing on this front side here. So see, I outlined the underside of the roof and I'm just brushing down some of the really dark red texture. Looks like it's casting a shadow. We're giving it dimension now. If you wanted a really bright red covered bridge, you could also brush on at this point a brighter red. Since you have some of the dry brushed white, it would be really, really bright red. I wanted to play around with it and see what it would look like. So this is what the bright red looks like on the covered bridge. But I did like the white brush strokes. So I'm going to go back in with just a tiny bit of white and dry brush each individual wood board. Hardly any white on my brush, but I love the texture and look that gives. Okay, time for some problem solving. Obviously, the water wouldn't be flowing just underneath the bottom of the bridge. There would be a little bit of space. So let's take some dark brown on a round brush and add some sort of support underneath the bridge to separate the red from the blue. Now that we know the direction the water is flowing, I'm also outlining the sides of the river bank, or the creek bank, whatever it is, with some dark brown. And to give it dimension, take some navy blue, a really dark tone, and brush out some shading so it looks like it's going underneath. And so the bridge doesn't fall over, let's give it an extra support. So 2 support beams underneath each edge and 1 long line above the brown like that. So it looks like the water's coming out of a tunnel. There we go. That already changes the entire look of the picture. Now on this right side here, these trees are supposed to be on the other side of the riverbank. So I don't want them to look like they're just kind of ambiguous. We're not going to be able to see the water. So anywhere where you have like questions in your head about what should go here, add a bush. That's my rule. So I just added some brown texture and then I took my sponge with some dark green paint and just bounced in some larger texture. This bush just hides whatever's going on the other side, and your brain kind of puts 2 and 2 together saying, oh, the water's going behind that. I'm also going to take a fan brush and brush up some grass in front of that bush so it doesn't look like we just plastered it on there. That's so much better. Okay. Now this left-hand side isn't quite as ambiguous. We can see the other side of the road going out. So I'm going to brush out some of the road color, making it look like it's going that direction. That also gives us a better idea of where our vanishing point is for the roof perspective. We'll fix that up then. But I'm going to kind of add some brown texture here with a round brush on the bottoms of the trees. Maybe there's some bushes. And should we add a bush on this side of the bridge? Probably. I'm going to add some bushes, but we do want to see some little impression of the road going off into the distance. So blend that in like that. And then I'm just going to tap in a bush with my artist sponge here, right on the back end of the bridge, right here on the corner. There we go. Okay. Now let's pretend the vanishing point is way off to the left. We can see where the road is. So that means this line here needs to tilt down a little bit because it's going away from us, and the bottom part of the bridge needs to go up. This point up here is way too far up. That really should be tilted down a little bit. And one reason why I did tree texture behind the bridge is it was a bit strategic because I wasn't sure where we were going with it. You can actually go in with texture and your sponge and cover up parts of the roof that shouldn't be there. So I'm putting some of the same colors over top of the extra roof area. Make sure it's dry, and then we can fix the perspective. I'm going to take a ruler now, make sure it's going somewhat the right direction. It's going off into the distance from that top point. And then take a flat brush. I'm taking a little bit more white with my roof color now to give it a highlight, and just fill that in just like we did before. Oh, that already looks so much better. Now see how that back end is tilted up a little bit too far? We're going to bring that down as well. And let's bring this line up a little bit more right here. Okay, so much better. Now we're getting a better idea of what the final product is going to look like. You can add some more shading or texture to your roof with the flat brush. And I'm even going to take a detail brush and re-outline some of the lines since they're more finalized. And while that's dry and we know the right angle for the bottom of the bridge, let's fix up the angle of the underside of the support. I took some black and I cleaned that up and made the shading even darker. It would be black at the very, very back, and then blend out some dark navy blue. Super, super dark underneath here is important for dimension to make it look like it's going into the hole. And to be honest, I've changed the design of the water a couple times in my head. I'm just not sure yet, so don't be afraid to play with different styles. First, I tried taking some white and doing some Ripley looks in here. I thought maybe that would give it a cool texture, but ended up looking too stripy, so I went in with a brush and blended it. Then I decided to take some of the sky color and brighter blues and make it blue really towards the bottom left-hand corner. Now, I actually really liked that, but then it got too light, so I went back and added more shading. You can see how you could keep going back and forth and like experimenting with this. Looking back, I really actually did like this style probably the best, but I kept experimenting. Nothing wrong with that. I still wanted little white ripples too, so since I liked the dry brushing on the covered bridge, I tried to dry brush on some highlights on the water too. Okay, now it's time to start doing more problem solving. I said I wanted to add some rocks in my head, so I took some of just black and a round brush and added little tiny round circles on the edge. And while it was still wet, grabbed a tiny bit of white and did some highlights on each of those blobby shapes. Notice how you can see a tiny bit of the black around the outside edges. So don't have the gray run into itself as much. You can leave some of the black to look like shading. We're going for impressionistic rocks. On this other side here, I'm also going to add some blobby shapes with the black. They can be all different shapes and sizes. Rocks are not perfect round circles, remember that. And while it's still wet, take some white, and while they're still wet, add tiny touches over top. Just tiny little curved brush strokes. You're making the rock look round and leaving some of the black showing through on the outside edges. Don't worry if they're not perfect. Your grass and other things can be covering up most of them. This is just defining the edge of the creek and giving your eyes something else pretty to look at. You're answering questions in your head, like what would be there? This is answering that question in your head. Let's add a couple highlights on this side and then step away. Didn't that change the whole thing? I love it. Okay, more problem solving. This road looks too much the same color, so I brightened it up on the bottom by giving it a highlight, making sure it's darker towards the inside of the bridge. And on this edge here, it looks too plain, so let's add a bush. That's my answer for things I'm not sure what should be there. Add a bush with my sponge and some dark green. And to give it a highlight, I don't want them to be perfect like white highlights, so I'm going to take some tan from the road while we have it and just do a couple taps over top of each bush. That's going to give a slight highlight in your head without it looking too much like a cartoon. So let's do one back there. And how about this bush on the right-hand side? Just a couple taps. There, okay, that solves that problem. Now the grass looks funny because we blocked it in, but we covered the bottoms and the tops of the grass. So let's go back in with our fan brush and fix that up. We're planting more grass in those bald spots. The grass can be going up over top of the rock and over top of the bushes to make sure it's looking like it's growing in and around everything. And the fan brush doesn't always do the job of as much detail, so if you're taking your time with your painting, if it's a very detailed painting like this, I'm going to take the same tiny little liner brush from my nail art brush pack that I did the branches with, and I'm adding tiny little blades of grass in different areas where it looks either too symmetrical or like there's bald spots. So see, I'm adding some back here in front of the bush. And then I finally stepped away and realized we're missing the windows on the bridge. You have to be able to see when you're driving through, right? So now this is a trick. If your painting is perfectly dry, be careful with this, but you can use tape to help line up windows. I'm going to have 3 rectangular windows. Just paint them in with black paint. I made sure they're going the right direction for perspective. And oh, isn't that satisfying? You just peel it right up. Then you can go in and fix up the lengths a little bit, but that'll make sure they're all lined up properly. I just made sure the windows on the opposite side were about the same height, but I eyeballed them. I'm using just the tan color for my road to make it look like you're looking out from the other side. Maybe there's a partial one right here. And then now that we have everything in there, let's make sure that the shading is even darker. I'm using a lot of black mixed with a bit of brown. Let's even add more shading coming out of the tunnel. Oh, that gives it dimension. And you might see some of the colors from the trees in the background, so you can even add that to some of those inside windows. And really at this point, all the extra details are up to you how far you want to push this. I went in and I added more highlighting and shading to my roof. And don't be mad, but I even went in and I fixed up the water again. Now, usually there's a point where you have to decide when you're done, and I could have been done a long time ago. But out of curiosity, I really wanted to see what really dark water all the way through would look like. So I ended up actually going in and covering all of my pretty bright blue and making it all navy. And then I took a detail brush and added just a couple little tiny wavy highlights to make it look like ripples in the water. Maybe they're going over some little rocks in the creek, and that's adding a shine. And one more problem I saw is I just lightly tapped in a tiny bit of brown for the edges, the bottom edges of the grass along the road looked really funny. So this just helped finish that up as well. I could keep going with this and keep finding problems to solve, but I'm going to stop there. It definitely turned out much more detailed than my original idea that I did over there in about 5 minutes. This took about 5 hours. So take your time with it. It's been a top request for a while, so I wanted to make sure to get pretty detailed with it and just show you what a creative process looks like. Don't forget to make it your own and have fun. I'll try to have it traceable for you as soon as possible. Have fun and happy painting.